Welcome to the CLIMAX Academy Live. I'm Jim Miller, the Global Training Manager. This video series we're doing is a good overview for people to see some of our equipment. And today we're going to be covering the FF6300 Flange Facer chucking and alignment. So we're only going to go halfway in this video today. And then in a future video, next week or week after, we'll do the operation and how to set the tool bit and all that kind of stuff, the tool head. But this week, we're just going to focus on the setup and leveling. So thanks for joining us. The thing that I will remind people of is that if you have any questions during the video, go ahead and type those in at the Zoom Q&A, and we'll get to those at the end. And if we get a lot more questions than we can answer, we'll carry some of those over till the next time we're together and answer those when we meet again on the second half of the video. So as always, I like to start out with safety. Make sure, especially running equipment, you've got your hard-toed safety shoes on. You've got your safety glasses with side shields. We want to do a quick risk assessment of the area that we're going to be working in. Make sure there's no cords or hoses or anything we're going to run into when the equipment comes on. We also want to be real cautious of any pinch points, any chips that we create by the cutting. They're very, very sharp. Any tool bits that we're going to be handling. Just in general, a good look over of your working area and make sure that you know where the hazards are and they're not going to jump up and bite you. So, okay, good. Well, now that we've kind of focused on that, let's go ahead and we'll again, when the video's playing, go ahead and type in your questions at that Zoom Q&A, and at the end we'll address those. So enjoy the video. Okay, welcome. My name is Jim Miller. I'm the Global Training Manager, and today we're going to talk about the FF6300 Flange Facer. Very unique design machine. Has the ability to go from 12-inch mounting, just under 12-inch mounting, out to 57.5 inches, or just over 57 inches. So it's got a wide variety of range that it can fit in. And basically you have two components to that. You have a chucking system that allows you to chuck out to that diameter, and you have an adjustable turning arm which allows you to adjust out to that diameter. So we're going to go through some of the features of the machine, and then we'll get right into the setup and how everything sets up. So I'll be switching back and forth from close up to far, and so let's just go ahead and go through this. So the chuck itself is the main component here. When you receive the machine, the main body is attached to the chuck, and then you've got a series of these extensions that allow you to thread those into all four jaws of the chuck. And the manual goes through what extensions are needed with what range of diameter that you're needing to chuck inside. So that's basically the overall of how the machine looks, and then we'll break it down and we'll go through each component and how those components function. So here we have two of the different extensions that are part of that chucking mechanism. So let's start with the first one here. The shortest extensions that I have are already in the chuck. So there's a shorter extension than this, and this is the medium, and this is the long. Now how these work is they all have a triple lead thread that they screw together. So this end will thread into the long extension, the medium, and the short. And really this is the heart and soul of how the machine sets up. It has this extension, or this foot, threads into the extension, and as I turn this nut, this adjusts for concentricity or centering of the flange. So if this thread's in, it gets smaller. If this thread's out, it gets larger. So I want to roughly set the diameter based on the ID of the board, and then the chuck itself, I take away from the ID of the board, and that tells me what the distance is from the chuck to the end of the jaw that I need. So I can preset that ahead of time so that when I set the machine in the bore on the setup fingers, it'll just rest there, and then my crane can go away, and I can make the adjustments from there by hand. So let's go out to the end of the chuck foot here, and it comes with a setup finger attached to the jaw. So like I said, this rests, and I can show you here, this rests on the edge of the flange. And so when I start out, what I want to do is I want to make sure that the face of this foot is even with the face of this part of the chuck body, or the foot body. And so if they're all the same, then the machine's going to be level. And then from there, if I need to make an adjustment, I can put the wrench in, and you can see that as I turn this, it adjusts the foot in or out. So that's how I get my adjustment for perpendicularity. So now you can see this close up here. As I turn that foot threads out further, and as I turn it the other way, it threads in. So I want to make sure those are all even, and that I get the appropriate set of chuck jaws, and then I can set the machine in to the end of the board just as I have it here. Okay, so now let's talk about starting our setup. So like I said before, the ID of this flange is 18 inches. So I looked in the manual, and the manual tells me that I need this one the shortest extension and the adjustable foot. You'll note that on the arm, it has a marking here that tells me what the range of the arm will face. So I have it in the smallest setting, and the counterweight isn't really important to me in this setup because I'm horizontal. So I'll just set it out of the way so that it's not going to obstruct anything. I'm going to turn off the air. I'm going to unplug the machine. So now I have no air power going to the machine. Now I can move it. I can move it manually by turning the machine, or I can put the wrench in and move the machine around manually that way. And I prefer this method because I can move it exactly. Let's go ahead and start thinking about our setup. So I know that if this bore is 18 inches, and I have to take what I do is I take the diameter of the chuck away from 18, and then I divide that number by half. So then I know exactly what the dimension is from the face of the chuck to the ID of the bore. So what I do is I roughly set let me show you here, I roughly set this diameter from this inside of the jaw to the back of the chuck, because that's the number I'm going to use. So I'm going to go ahead and measure exactly from one side, and then I'll go around to the other side. And I'll measure that exact same number. So the way I make sure that that's even is I tighten this wrench, and that's what centers the machine. So I'll go ahead and make sure that's tight. Go ahead over here. I'll make sure that's tight. And so I'll go back and forth. I'll go back and forth to get the exact number that I need to center. So once I get front to back this way, now I'll go side to side. So I'll go side to side. I'll make an adjustment. There. And I'll go to the other side. Make an adjustment. Now sometimes I might want to move this out of the way just a little bit so that I can get to the wrench. Okay, there's my setting. Now I'll go to the other side.
Okay, so the amount of difference from one side to the other, I want to cut in half. So I'm going to go ahead and make my adjustment, and let me show you again how I make that adjustment. I can use an Allen wrench here. So as I put a wrench in there, I can move this jaw up and down. So that up and down movement is what I'm setting my indicator by. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a fine adjust with the dial indicator on there. I'm only going to cut that number in half. So let's say it's off 10 thousandths. I'm going to only move it 5 because I want to split the difference. I don't want to move it all because then I would have the same amount on the opposite side. So I'm going to make a fine adjustment there. And these are both 10 millimeter wrenches. So I cut that in half. I'll re-zero it. Zero. So I'm 0, 0 this way. Now I'll do the same thing this way, make sure everything's 0. Now once I have the chuck tight and level, then I have a screw here on the face of this. And let me just show you how that works. So this is what we call a jam nut. This is what allows the chuck, the jaw to be tightened down so that you can't adjust it anymore. So these 4 screws on the face of each adjustable foot, that pulls this nut in and out and tightens the screw so it can't work its way out. So once I'm all set, I want to go to each jaw and I want to tighten these up so that they're nice and tight. You know, so everything's locked down, and I'll go to each one and make sure everything's tight before I'm ready to start cutting. Now that I have the chuck centered and tight and level, I'm going to go ahead and remove the setup fingers. But I want to make sure that the chuck is good and tight and level before I remove the setup fingers.
Now that we've watched the setup and alignment video, we can go into our question and answer time together. Hopefully that was helpful. And again, next time we're together, we'll go through some more of the operational side and how the feed box works, how the tool head works. But let's go ahead and jump into the questions that we have. John, if you wouldn't mind reading a couple of those questions.
Is it possible to chuck clamp the unit on the OD of the part? Sometimes I have parts where the ID cannot be used.
Absolutely. So the machine comes standard with an ID chuck. So when you order a machine, it'll come to you with just the ID set up like I described in the video. There's also the option of an OD mount, and there's also an option of a face mount. So depending on your application, a face mount will allow you to mount it right down on a flat surface with no hole in the middle. Tube sheet or a crane base or anything that you need to just set the machine on or tack weld it on or clamp it on and make your adjustment on a flat plate without anything, without a hole for the ID chuck. The OD mount, now that mounts right up on this top plate of the machine. I would remove the lifting eyes. I would remove the tower that secures the air lines, and the OD chuck will set right down over the top of that. And so the machine is suspended by that OD chuck. That OD chuck has a mechanism that allows me to center and level built into it. So it's a 3-jaw chuck that I can either mount to a bolt circle on a flange, or it has a chain clamp option that allows me to set 3 pads around the OD of the flange, and the 3-jaw chuck sets into that, and then it's chained and bound around the OD of the flange. So hopefully that answers your question. We have a ID chuck that comes standard with the machine, an optional face mount, and an optional OD mount.
Do the setup fingers contact the ID of the board or only rest on the flange during setup?
They only rest on the face of the flange. They're recessed back behind the jaw slightly so that they don't interfere, that when you pull the setup finger off, it doesn't, you don't have to, worry about it contacting the ID of the flange when it comes off there. So we've set the height of the setup finger so that it places the machine at the right level. But that doesn't mean if you need to lift the machine, you can't shim under it. But if you have to go deeper, if you need to go deeper, you have to make a little longer jaw or put a spacer under the jaw. But no, the inside of the setup finger does not contact the board.
Can you machine ring joints with FF63?
Yeah, absolutely. A ring joint or an RTJ, some people will call them. It's basically a ring seal, and so it's got beveled sides with a flat bottom. And the tool head, and we'll cover this next week, but that's a good question, will allow me to set the 29.5 degrees on one side and the other. And so I can put a groove in, and then I can bevel it down if that's your angle of your RTJ, but they vary some. But yeah, it has the capability. It's basically 3 setups. I would set the tool post at 0. I would set it at the front side of the angle and traverse that angle, single point that angle, and then turn it and single point the angle on the inside.
Let's see. How tight do the setup arms or the chuck arms need to be to retain the machine? How tight is too tight?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's one of those questions that it's really difficult to answer, right? Because like this ring that I'm set up in here, I could probably put an 8-inch or 10-inch cheater bar on the wrench, and I'm not going to deform this flange. But if I've got a delicate workpiece, diaphragm or something that's not a real thick wall, I got to be pretty careful that I don't distort the material that I'm chucking into. So it's almost impossible for me to say, go to this torque value and go to this, this amount of pressure, whether it's ID or OD. Now, that is one thing that the OD chuck applies less pressure to the vessel that I'm attaching to, because the majority of the pressure is taken by the clamp, versus the ID chuck actually applying pressure to the ID of the vessel that I'm trying to cut, or the flange that I'm trying to cut. So it's almost impossible for me to give you a torque value. It's one of those things where if you're worried about it, put a tether on the machine. It come up from the bottom, put something that'll keep the machine secured. Oftentimes with some of the bigger machines, we tack weld a block in behind the feet and actually put a secure bolt so that the machine is confined. But if it were to work itself loose, it can't come out. You'd know it right away because it'd start chattering and vibrating. But again, it's planning ahead, making sure that the machine is secured, as good as you can without distorting the flange you're working in. That was kind of a rambling long answer. Hopefully your answer was in there somewhere.
Is there an additional part required to machine RTJ grooves?
Additional part? Technically, no. Tooling is always a variable, but really the machine is capable right out of the box to cut an RTJ or a ring joint. But you need the tooling that would allow you to do that, a grooving tool of some kind. We have a variety of tool holders that'll hold a grooving tool. And you can order like a parting tool that you can use. But basically, again, you're cutting a groove straight into the face. So you could take the feed unit, put it right on the arm of the tool head, and now you have the ability to single point or to actually feed on the vertical axis. So you can plunge a groove, then you can retract, set the angle, and then continue to cut that groove to the diameter on either side. So the machine is capable right out of the box. It's the tooling that you have to acquire that'll allow you to do it. Okay, great. Well, hey, those were good questions. Again, we'll get a little bit more, I'm sure we'll get a little bit more questions next time on some of the finer points of the operation. This being just basically set up an alignment. So if you think of any questions between now and then, go ahead and submit those to askcpmt@cpmt.com. And like with any of our other videos that we've done, any questions that you have on any of our products that you think, man, this would really be something I'd like to see you do a live stream on, feel free to put those on there as well. Askcpmt@cpmt.com, and we'll get those in or we'll answer you direct. All right, well, thanks for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next time.